Hello and welcome back to our kitchen. Welcome to season 3 of Geek Recipe, and our first guest this season is Sarah Beaulieu, writer and narrative director. Sarah?
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you. Sarah, we are here in our kitchen. I know you know the format, so we've sort of discussed a bit about it. Today we're going to cook a pasta from the south of Italy. Which is Paccheri alla norma.
Okay.
Right, with eggplant and a little sauce with tomato and garlic. Sarah, you are a narrative director.
Yeah.
Right, so there's going to be a lot of storytelling today. We're trying to do some storytelling, right? Whilst cooking. So first thing, I'll start opening the fire here to start cooking stuff. So the first thing we usually ask is, what are you working on? But I cannot ask you.
Currently.
Because it's all secret, which is great.
Yeah,
we love secrets.
I can tell you what I'm doing outside of video games.
Yeah,
because,
why not? Yeah, let's go.
Secret,
let's start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a graphic novel actually.
Okay.
Which has nothing to do with video games. Kinda. Yeah, it's a graphic novel about Mary Shelley. Maybe you know about her. Yeah. Writer from Frankenstein.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's my current project. And I have several others, many projects.
So you say you work on many things. Well, of course, in the background we see you've been working on Assassin's Creed Mirage. So that's your, video game stuff. But you said you're working on theater, cinema, many other things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've seen everything about narrative and telling stories.
I've seen some stuff, not everything, but some stuff.
What are the big differences in the different part, telling the stories in different formats?
That's a very wide question. Do we have 2 hours?
No. Keep it in 2 minutes if you can.
Yeah, I can do that. So every time you start working on a project and it's it's applying to video games as to literature or movies or whatever, theater, is you have to define the tools that you have to tell your story.
Okay.
And in video games it's pretty specific because, as we discussed previously, it was you don't have a story per se for each video game. You have narrative maybe, but you don't have a story. Whereas in movies, you always have a story. You have characters, you have things happening, you have stakes, you have this kind of stuff. So it's very different from other formats.
Ask you to crush the tomatoes in time?
I can do that. That I can do. And so every time you start a project, you need to define how you're going to tell the story, if you have a story. And that's what we call the narrative means. So in movies and in theater, it's pretty, everybody knows about them. That's characters, that's, the narrative that we all used to. And in video games, it's why I like video game that much. It's always different. So sometimes you don't have any characters in a video game. So how do you tell something? How do you, have themes and how do you convey emotions if you don't have any characters or things happening in a very scripted way? So, that's procedural writing, that's different types of writing. And so, what's the difference? It's you don't tell the same things because you don't have the same tools for each medium. Of course. Yeah.
And one of the interesting aspects of video games that you were mentioning earlier on was the difference between a story and a narrative. Can you go through that? Because that's, I think, fascinating.
Okay, so you know what a story is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, how would you define it? Like personally, how would you define a story?
All right, okay, you're asking me.
Yes,
well, okay.
Absolutely.
A story is, it's a narration with characters interacting and, having experiences and, culminating into some sort of ending or of some sort, I guess.
Yes, exactly. That's a good. So you have a structure, you have a beginning, an ending, and things happening in the middle. Characters with obstacles and things they want and things they don't know they want yet, but they will want at some point. So it's always the same structure. Narrative, for example, and we took an example. That's a very simple example from a video game called Gris.
Okay.
That's one example among many, but Gris is an example of how you tell a story without using characters per se, or when you don't have a very defined objective for the character. So you just wander into a world where you're beginning to understand as a player that something is happening for this girl that you're playing, that probably she's going through grief of some sort, or maybe she has something happened to her and she's trying to deal with it. So it's not clear. You have to make up your own story about it, and that's fine, because that's what's cool about video games is you can interpret things and you can So a narrative would be a way to tell things and bring emotions to the player without having this very defined structure and characters that you just describe for story. So yeah,
one of the things that is emerging is actually the right word, but it's like this thing where basically players are empowered with creating their own stories now, right? So you create the overall narrative, and then players are like almost making the story happen within a general narrative. Is there a way that in general you can sort of guide the players, or is total freedom key?
I don't believe in total freedom, to be honest, because it's always you always bring things to the player first, and then the player deals with them. So you bring the player some tools, you bring the player some mechanics, you bring the player some context, some world, and everything. So even The Sims, you have some specific tool. The Sims is one of the I would say toy books, better toy books ever. But still, you have some defined tools, and you can't do everything you want. That's not, you have what you have because the designers, they actually provided you with some tools. So I don't believe in total freedom, but you have ways of, I would say, guiding the player without them knowing sometimes, For example, when you feel like in an open world, you have the choice of going everywhere. Sometimes it's very easy to understand you can't go there because the boss is too hard to beat for you yet. So that's a kind of gate, as we would call it. But sometimes it's a bit more subtle. You have what we call conditionals. So for example, if you've seen this part of the world, you can actually go there, or if you've talked with this character, for example, you can actually do that, but it's very, very agnostic for you as a player. You don't know that it's conditional, so it feels like you're free, but actually it's all gated and it's all scripted and it's all... So yeah, you have many ways to guide the player inside a world that is supposed to be an open world. So
you don't go, there's a T-Rex, because you can't go there, and you try and explore other parts,
that's
and then you get there.
That's an example. It's also a way for us as designers to say, okay, she's not going to be able to beat this T-Rex, for example. And so therefore we're going to be waiting a bit more for this. For example, if we have a story, this beat won't be happening before they beat the T-Rex. So we have a way of making sure the narrative goes a certain way, and that you don't see things that you're not supposed to see yet before you've done this or this.
Makes sense. And this is constraints for the players. One other part is constraints for the writers, right? It's a big part of our industry that you've got technical constraints, you've got like lore constraints. If you're working on stuff like Assassin's Creed, it comes with a baggage of existing storyline and so on. Do you like that? You don't like that? Is that something you feel comfortable with? Okay.
I love it, and we're going back to what we were talking about earlier about the narrative means. But every time you start a project, you have a budget, you have tech constraints, as you said, you have human constraints, because sometimes you have a team of 100 people, 600 people, or 10 people. So you have to deal with that first. And every time you start a project on the narrative side, it's like you have to define your narrative means again. Am I in 2D, 3D? Do I have dialogues? Is it voiced? Is it only text? Do I have, can I make the player read letters or notes or whatever? So it's different narrative means every time. And each time you start a project, you have constraints, and that's where the creativity comes from. I love constraints. I mean, again, I was telling you that earlier, but the blank page thing is terrifying to me. So I prefer just having, constraints, but not not silly constraints, like constraints coming from somewhere, from creative decisions
Okay.
for, a vision, specific vision. The fact that it's 2D rather than in 3D, I prefer it to be a creative input rather than a, technical constraint, because you can always come up with ideas just to avoid technical constraints. So I prefer when it comes from a creative vision, something.
Yeah. Do you actually, when you write stuff on your own, like stories or you set theater and stuff like that, you set yourself your own constraints?
Yes.
Is that something you tend to do? Because I think that in general, when you have stories, I keep referring to this like license stuff, like what you say, let's say Star Wars or stuff like that. The constraints are the lore, or the characters. It's like huge constraints, and some people don't feel comfortable working within that, that stuff. But is that something that you tend to set yourself when you write, a blank page type of thing?
I try to. I mean, for example, you have constraints coming from the medium itself. For example, theater. That it's going to be relying a lot on actors.
Okay.
So I don't put myself any constraints on that side. I just try to write for people I know.
Okay.
Because it's easier for me to have their voices and way of moving in my head. So it's not a constraint per se, but it's let's say a field that I can play on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And for everything, that is not, for example, movies or whatever things I try to do on screen, it's I'm trying to have budget in mind.
Okay.
So, for example, currently I'm trying to find a way to produce a movie, write and produce a movie and direct it in under 2,000 euros, right?
Okay,
2,000, 2,200, whatever.
Okay, but a certain budget. A certain budget.
So a very small budget for a movie.
Okay.
So I need to write it in a very, I would say, defined place, and it's not supposed to be like, I think I just need 2 actors. That's maximum for the budget.
Okay.
So it's kind of it's a budget constraint, but I know where the money comes from, so I can't do anything more than that.
It's almost like going back to when it was COVID, and people were trying to shoot movies in, in small houses or stuff like that, so you don't have to move stuff around and so on. What's the most challenging thing you ever done in terms of, I need to be, working within this frame, and you felt yourself like limited into the number of things you could do? Yeah.
I mean, the more people you have on a project, the more difficult it is.
Okay.
Because I can see some. That's kind of that's emotional to me. But that's the first mobile game I worked on. That was my first team, and it was a team of, I can't remember, like 40 people max.
Wow. Okay.
I guess so. It was very easy to talk and very easy to just go to your colleague and ask for something and twist some stuff. So it was. But whereas in, for example, production like Assassin's Creed Mirage, we were at some point 600 people, and it was a huge team, and just talking with people and trying to get some information right, or trying just to make sure your vision is, I would say, understood by everybody in the team. That can be very challenging.
It's
absolutely. A lot of people.
And the idea of working with so many people, is it because you have to convey your vision and then they don't understand it, or is it because you spend more time in trying to convey your vision and to actually, working on the actual, scripting or writing or whatever?
It's more that it's not because they don't understand it, because it's never people's fault. It's always the problem of communication. So people are different. And you don't talk to people the same way, depending on, for example, some of them like to read, some of them don't, some of them, they just prefer videos or whatever. So it's trying to find a way to communicate with people every time you do have a specific thing to convey. Okay, I understand that. But it's interesting, because this is a problem of organizations. Like, all roles have this problem, but the real big difference is that this is impacting the game, right? Exactly. So
So big companies communication, small projects, I guess, too much freedom maybe, or?
There's never too much freedom, but you know, and that's funny because this one is a Signal. It's you know, mainly entirely made by a friend of mine, and it's so Renaud Despinois is his name, and it's a game jam game. So we did it for, you know, like during a couple of days, and I only did a few dialogues and narrative design, but we you know, in this type of freedom, I guess, we're just two. And we have to make a game with constraints. You know, game jam is what it is. Yeah, it's constraints and everything. But
Can I ask you for a couple of leaves of basil?
Okay,
Yeah.
I can do that too. And so it's different type of freedom, I guess. And that's, I mean, I'm come from the indie scene mostly. So to me, it's. Do you need more? Do you need?
No, it's
how
fine.
many
It's
do you
fine.
need?
It's just for this sauce
because
here.
it smells good.
Smells very good. Yeah.
So yeah, the indie world in video games is really much. It's not about freedom per se, but it's more about you have more freedom to tell the things that you want to tell, in terms of themes, for example. Because when you're a huge company, you have players that you need to, you know, satisfy, and it's a huge pressure. On the developers and the publisher. So you don't have the same kind of freedom in terms of themes mostly. So that's what I like the indie scene that much, is that you can try things, you can experience things, and you're not afraid about disappointing people, because people
absolutely.
don't, you know, wait for it per se. Whereas when you're working on a big game like Assassin's Creed, you have a lore to respect, you have a community, you have all the things.
Absolutely. So storytelling, as we said, pasta alla norma. We're using only ingredients today that are from the south of Italy. Pasta alla norma is from Sicily, so the recipe is from Sicily, but the pasta we're using is Paccheri. Paccheri with made in Campania, so near Naples.
Okay.
Trafilato al bronzo means it's made in copper.
Okay.
It's actually made in the copper. So we do like 10 of these. They are kind of big, so.
Wow.
12 actually, I've been told. 5, there's 5, 7, 9, 11, 12.
Okay.
The eggplants are from Puglia.
Okay.
Which is the other side of the country. The tomatoes too, they are from San Marzano, which is an interesting story. San Marzano is one of 2 towns in the south of Italy, in Puglia, which was founded by Albanese immigrants. We're trying to mix everything, and then the wine will be from the north of Italy.
Oh wow, the wine.
So I'm taking the eggplants out here.
I'm trying to learn, but actually I'm not paying attention.
No, don't worry. It's all because we take a lot of pride of the local ingredients here in Italy, and everyone has a very, you know, is very fond of their own, you know, little town production of this or that. I guess it's same in France, right?
We do have the same, kind of pride. So,
of course, we're not cooking an omelette au fromage, so it's it's a bit more complicated than that. Sophisticated, I would say, Although it's very simple stuff, so we're not trying to do something that's like cooking a pigeon or something like that. One of the other points I wanted to quickly touch on in terms of writing and narration in games and in general is in video games we have the limitations that are technical, and one of the big struggles, I think, over the years, maybe now it's easier, but it's hard to convey emotions, right? So there are things that we do very well in games. Fighting, killing each other. We don't do very well in romance, in, making people cry or making people feel, emotional or sad or other emotions. We're good at frightening them and so on. But so how do you deal with that in games? Because that's, I think, an important part of the evolution of narration.
Yes, absolutely. But I feel like currently we're not past that, but we've evolved a lot already. mainly because, and thanks to the indie scene, so the indie games. At some point when the indie came, it was the scene of independent games. It was all about getting rid of the publishers and doing their own thing. So at some point when it began, it was that. Now it's a bit different because most indie, they have publishers, but it's really like, can we experiment what it is to tell stories or to have a narrative in game and tell, bring emotions to the player. And indie games currently, I mean, for example, there is a very, very famous Spanish team called Deconstruct Team. That's their name, the name of the studio, and they worked on several very little games, all about emotions. And I think on you can find them online. One of their bundle is called Essays on Empathy. So that's different types of games, but it's always bringing some emotion and that's the feeling of belonging to a world. That's the feeling of embodying someone that you don't know anything about, but start to feel empathy for. So how do you bring mechanics into this kind of game so that the mechanics can actually help support the narrative and support the emotions?
Is that something? Is that something that will then transition to mainstream at some point, you think?
It does already in some cases, but the thing about mainstream games is that they're very long. So it's hard to be engaged in a very long experience when you, for example, you play for 2 hours and then you go back to work and then you go back to your game 2 days after and you try to keep up with the narrative.
The game
whereas, for example, this team, they work on very, very short games, so it's like you can finish it in most of their games in like 6 hours maximum. So it's a very condensed experience. So it's easier to keep up with the narrative and the
so the time
is
an important plays an important part.
So I guess the main thing for games is finding the right mechanics so that it can support the narrative. And for example, in this case, at some point for a game jam, they made a game called Behind Every Great One. And it's a game about a depressed woman in a house, and she's living with her husband, and the husband is always telling her at the end of each day, you have to do the dishes, you have to make sure the bathroom is clean, etc. But as a player, it's a bit like The Sims. You have 4 actions per day, so you can actually clean the bathroom if you want, but you can also read a book or do fun stuff. But the thing is, you have more, I would say, silly and constraints stuff to do. For example, cleaning the dishes or whatever. Then you have actions per day. So it's not possible as a player to actually please the husband because you don't have as many actions as you need. So every time you end a day and you do these actions, the husband is going to be happy anyway. So it's like through the mechanics and this frustration that the player feels of not being able to fulfill the husband demands, you actually feel the frustration of the wife, and you feel like it's not fair, and you feel like something wrong is going on. So it's a simple mechanic, which is actually something that the player can't do. And mechanics is what you can do is what you can't do actually. So it's all relying on mechanics, and it works very well.
It's almost like again going back to the limitations and ideas of using the tools you have to sort of make sure that players have an experience. It's incredibly interesting. Can I ask you, in the fridge there's a bottle of wine we can get. So Sarah, the next big challenge in games, what is it that you would like to?
You mean me personally?
I guess as you work now on big projects, and small projects, and you looked at a bit of everything, and you're knowledgeably talking about stuff that is very indie and very specific. So you clearly research a lot, right?
Yes, I do.
So. What is it that you think is missing, and we're still a bit, we'll have to, still work on in terms of telling stories in games?
I feel like the one main thing we need is producers and game designers and everybody working in the video game industry really understanding what narrative means. Because most of the time when we had this conversation is people think that narrative is story. And so you have different game designers, for example, who would say, I don't want any story in my game, so what would I put narrative into it? That's not it. That's not it. It's just a way of, thinking about your mechanics in a different way. So mechanics actually can bring emotions by themselves. So that's narrative. And what are you trying to say with your game? What is the theme? What is the message? And sometimes at the end of a production, you have a message, and it's the same thing for movies. You have a message that you couldn't think about before, and it's like sometimes it's a good message, and sometimes you're like, it's not what I was going to say. It's not my message initially. So why, why is it? So you have to make sure that the team understands what we're trying to say, and that's narrative. So I guess that there is a big misunderstanding in the. I don't guess. I'm sure there is a big misunderstanding in some of the teams of what is narrative, and it's a bit frightening for a lot of teams.
Do you think this is because there is still a big clash between technical roles and artistic roles?
Yeah, sometimes, especially in big teams where you have people who's been in the industry for a long time. So sometimes you have people who are used to not putting in a narrative in their games, and that's okay. I mean, that's totally fine. So they are a bit defiant against people that should that probably have these big names like narrative directors, and we don't know what they are doing, so they're a bit frightened by that. So it's because mainly they grew up with games with no narrative.
Is there a thing where basically you're saying indie games done in a game jam?
Yeah.
For in your mind they're the same as the bigger productions and so on. So do you see that in some ways there's too much fragmentation in bigger teams, that people do very specific things, and whilst the indie games you've got these people with they're like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people doing a lot of different roles.
Absolutely.
Do you think that helps, or do you think that hinders the
I think that's one of the reasons why vision is so much more coherent in small teams.
Okay.
Also because when you learn to do stuff that you're not used to do, for example, if you do game design when you're an artist, for example, well, you actually understand the constraints better. You understand the vocabulary, and being able to communicate then with other people like game designers in the future when you're an artist, because you actually worked on game design at some point. It's very helpful. So you understand, you speak the same language if you wish. Yeah. So it's like you can actually go to, for example, that's another cool example, but the first time I went to an animator on this specific game, I wanted to work with him on idols, so you know what idols are. Yeah. And that was the first time I was working with an animator so close, so we could get very specific idols that were very close to the character's personality. It was a great work to do with him, and I learned a lot about his vocabulary, the way he would work, his process and everything, and it helped me for the games I did after that, because I understood his process and his state of mind and how we could help each other. That's the main thing.
The thing is that most of creative roles, artistic roles, are also very technical in a way, because your role is very technical as well, right? So you've got a process, you've got technique, you've got and so on. So it's really finding the balance between making sure that whoever does creative also knows that he is very technical, and vice versa, I guess.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes in people's mind, narrative is not technical at all. And narrative is just about, let's put a story into that. No, that's not it.
It is interesting.
So,
that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. Because, I guess it's also because our industry is so young, and you've got like cinema, theater, it's been going on for so long that now roles are, much more acknowledged and defined. Yes. Your role is kind of new in a way, right? Yeah,
kind of. And you're totally right. It's sometimes it's a question of process and understanding the process, but each studio and oh wow, that's my favorite part.
That's good.
Cheers.
Cheers. So this is a wine from the north of Italy, from here, here, Pinot Nero from close to Pavia, which is like in Lombardy, so around here.
Okay.
Cheers.
Smells good. And I think that when you work on a movie, it's very linear, the production. That you have to write the movie first, then you have to shoot it, then you have to, of course, you have the casting part and everything, and then you have the editing, and then you have the screening. It's very, very simple. It's very linear. Whereas in game, you can start by whatever. You can start by, you know, a very specific mechanic, or you can start by the narrative. You want to start with a character or whatever. And sometimes it's art leading the whole, you know, thing. Like in Little Nightmares is one of these examples, leading by art. So it's very specific. And every time the process is different. So every time you have a new studio or you have a new project, you have to understand the process again, or you have to make it on the way, you know. You have to create the process, which is, you know, kind of...
But fitting narrative at the later stage is always wrong.
It's always wrong. That's something I'm advocating on very, very strongly in conferences and everything. Is you have to make sure that narrative and mechanics, they intertwine.
Yeah.
So that's working with the game designers very early on. And in my perfect world, game design and narrative design, which is another field of, should be, you know, the same people, you know, and not separated. Because game designers, sometimes they don't care about the narrative, so they don't, you know, they don't want to hear about it. But sometimes you have very, very game designers that are very keen to understanding what they're doing in terms of mechanics. Again, because a simple mechanic can tell a lot of things. So narrative designers, they tend to be game designers specialized in narrative. And I would like, you know, both of the worlds to actually merge and not be two different people. You know, that's
not
a perfect
always
world.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy at all.
Pasta's cooked. We're just finishing it now. Trying to avoid picking the big parts of garlic that I put in, which was not going to be super easy. See, here is art and technique as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Mechanics and narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is in the dish. That's the recipe. That's the Geek Recipe.
Absolutely. Well, actually, when you merge the two, I like to say that the game experience is a good merge between mechanics and narrative. That's the game experience in general. Oh, so you have to, okay, so you put them...
Yeah, on top.
Trying to burn again.
Trying to be artistic here.
It actually looks nice before it tastes nice.
I hope so. Okay, I'm going to ask my consultant on the back. Is that okay? Okay, good. Enzo is my consultant on the back. I need to make everyone aware that he's there, because otherwise I won't be doing all this. And that's our pasta alla norma or Paccheri alla norma. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm happy that we kicked off this new season with something that's really explaining a bit more of the insights of what it takes to make a game. And to make a nice experience. Yeah. So I'm very happy and that you are able to tell us so many ins and outs of how things work. So that was really, really kind of you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for inviting me. It was very nice.
Well, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And well, hopefully we'll soon know what you're working on. And
hopefully
the surprise will be unveiled. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
See you. Bye.